Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Stephan Schmidt. Based in Germany, Stephan is a CTO coach who is guiding technology leaders through the intricacies of their evolving roles. You can follow him on Twitter at InkMeHQ, that's InkMe with an I at the end of the me, and check out his website at inkme.com and subscribe to his Amazing CTO LinkedIn newsletter. Stephan is the author of the book Amazing CTO, The Missing Manual for Managing. In the book, Stephan provides an essential guide to CTOs and tech managers for managing effectively based on proven advice and offering many ideas for you to succeed in your management position and as you advance in your career. In this interview, we're going to talk about Stephan's background and career, his professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience writing. So thank you very much, Stephan, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. And I know you have an interesting one related to your book. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you first found yourself interested in technology and software.
I grew up in Germany in the 70s and 80s, and I played video games at the end of the 70s. And then I thought, well, I would like to write my own video game. So I teach myself programming in a department store. And then I wrote some video games with limited distribution because 80s. But yeah, so that's how I got into it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So how did it end up that you were coding in a department store?
Well, we didn't have a computer at home. Not a lot of people had computers and like 1981, 1982. And there are department stores and they had computers. I don't know why they had them because basically no one was using them, but they were standing around and you could type on them. Like C64s and VIC-20s and all of that 8-bit area stuff. And there were kids there who wrote some code, and I looked at what they were doing the same things, didn't understand what I was doing, but something happened on the screen. And so that's how I got into coding.
That's really amazing. I've heard lots of sort of interesting stories from people about how they got into coding, and you're the first person I've talked to who did it sort of just like standing around in a department store with other kids. And for anyone listening who might not be of the same vintage as we are, these computers were not connected to the internet. They were just standing there. If you wanted to learn how to code them, you talked to other people about it, or you got magazines and books and things like that.
Yeah.
Was there a culture of book like magazines in Germany for coding and making video games and things like that?
Yeah, it basically was the same, I think, like in the US or in the UK. So there were like C64 magazine or and later Amiga magazines.
Okay. And you eventually, I'm just looking at your LinkedIn profile, you eventually studied computer science in university?
Yeah, I studied computer science together with physics. Then I thought physics is too difficult. So I switched to computer science and medicine on the side. So like medical computer science, so understanding how all this machinery works and writing software for all this medical machinery. But then I thought, well, that's also boring. And so because I started studying philosophy on the side, so I studied philosophical computer science in the end. So that's what I got as a diploma.
That's very interesting. I have a little bit of a background in philosophy myself.
Cool.
Were you studying philosophy of mind and things like that, or things related to AI?
No, mostly, also. But the thing that I remember was American objectivism, I think, Peirce and Sanders and that stuff, because I found that interesting, and I've also found that very interesting related to computer science. So yeah,
no, that's a very interesting connection. You're reminding me of normally it's Haskell programmers who are also into philosophy. For some reason. Maybe it's the origins of Haskell and universities and things like that. And so, what were your first jobs in the industry doing? I mean, I think web development. You were early on in that.
Yeah. So my very first time I got money was as a kid, mostly for computer magazine articles and listings. They printed the source code of the stuff you wrote, and then you got a little bit of money for that. So that's how I got my first money for coding. And then at university, the internet arrived during summer break, I think, or during the spring break or something. So when we came back, there was the World Wide Web. And then I created HTML pages and did some CGI Perl stuff to create web applications at the university on a Deck Alpha, I remember correctly, perhaps. And then I was looking for a job, and there was a job which was for months hanging, a job ad hanging for months in the computer science department. And I applied for the job, and actually I was the first one who applied for that job after some months, because there were not a lot people who could write HTML in 1995 or something. Like, it was very, very brand new in Germany at that point. So that's how I got into it. And then I became an engineering manager very early. Like, if you're the first person, then you need to hire other people, and then you're an engineering manager. So that's how I got into management. So basically, I was more of a manager all the time instead of a coder. So I skipped the coding in industry. I basically jumped to an engineering manager.
And was that partly through an acquisition by eBay of a company that you were working for?
That was much later. So in the beginning, was in the 1990s, I was working for some startups. Then I founded some startups. Then I was working for larger companies. Then I ended up at a startup as a CTO, and that startup was bought by eBay. So I was for some time working for eBay as the CTO of an eBay subsidiary of eBay Germany.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. We're all sort of familiar with the term CTO now, but that's a term that's like, of relatively recent coinage, I believe. Maybe 25 years ago or something like that, right around the time.
Yes, I think
doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I first became an engineering manager, officially I became a manager because I needed to go to a computer fair and talk to Oracle and IBM. And so I went to my boss and said, I need a business card. And my boss said, yeah, here's a business card. And then I said, oh, that's a blank one. I need a title. And then he said, yeah, choose one. And so I became head of development. Would I have known what a CTO is back then, I would have become a CTO, I would wrote. But I didn't know that CTO existed. So I became a head of development by my own choosing.
That's a fascinating story. There's an interesting business history of that perhaps hasn't been written, of like management not really knowing what to do with technology people, particularly with computers. Years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing someone named Jerry Weinberg for the podcast, and I think this is correct. The first computer he ever was introduced to was himself. He had the job of computer, and he talked about the early being at a meeting, an important meeting in the early days of IBM getting into computers, and they thought that programming was like a one-off thing. Like, you would pay some people to program a machine, and then those pesky people would go away, and you'd have your working machines, and you'd manufacture them and try and manufacture them more cheaply and sell them for a higher price. And that was business. But when they realized they were going to have these programmers, there was just this sort of, like, he described this sort of like shock and sadness, because now it was this whole new thing they had to manage. And it's just fascinating that many people I've talked to over the years, there's just something about the job, right? Because it's somebody, like, it's all happening in between your ears, and it comes out on the screen in this language that nobody else can understand, and it makes the computers run. But it's kind of unlike any other job in a very specific way. Like, to pick the example of the bricklayer or someone working in a salt mine, you can look and see what they're doing. You might not be able to do it yourself. I mean, for particularly skilled things, like construction and stuff like that. But you kind of, even if you could never dig a tunnel like an engineer, like the Channel Tunnel or something, you kind of know what they're doing. But then coding is very different.
Yes, it's very different. And on two ideas about that. First, that has so many implications that especially CEOs and everyone can't see what people are doing. And, they just see something on the screen. It's a little bit dead horse on this point, but the iceberg metaphor, like, people that just see a tiny bit of the code. I think Joe Spolsky wrote about that a long time ago, and then they extrapolate from what they see to everything, and that has so many implications that they can't see really the code as business people. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing that's very special about our industry is that we don't have a we don't have a break in the media we're using. So like if you build this tunnel, you have a lot of planning and drawing, and then at one point you're switching from drawing stuff to building stuff, physical things. Whereas in coding, it's a smooth transition from an idea that gets more elaborate, and then it gets a ticket, and then it gets a more elaborate ticket, and then it gets code. So it's always a transformation from information into information that's more detailed, but there is no break in it. So it's not clear where requirements end and where coding starts, for example. So that's just a smooth scale or a gradient between the idea and the code that's running. It's never changing the medium compared to every other industry or any other profession.
Yeah, for sure. And that of course brings with it particular challenges. And you were there, and you've sort of in your part of your story, you found yourself promoted because you knew how the technology worked. But handling people and handling technology are sort of different things to some extent. And what can you think back to those days? What do you remember? What maybe your first sort of big challenge was, or thing you felt unprepared for when you became head of development?
I think the first thing I was not prepared for was the pressure. I got a lot of customer pressure because we were building in the 90s. We were building where I was working, customer projects on the internet, and that was pre-CMS. So there was no CMS and none of that fancy stuff. So this was all pre-WordPress, pre-blogging. So these were really custom projects to bring content into the internet, and there was so much pressure. I remember once we were coding at night, and then I got a call from a customer, and they said, if you don't make this deadline this week for a trade show, we're going to sue you. And then so we will close your company. And like that, I got a lot of pressure from external people that I was not prepared for. So taking responsibility and being responsible for the delivery of a project or of a software product, that's the first thing I wasn't prepared for. And then the second thing I think, which I wasn't prepared for, was laying off people. So at one point, a head of HR called me and said, we need to lay off people, or you need to lay off people. And I wanted to argue, and in the end, there was nothing to argue, but I wasn't prepared for that. So that were two very challenging moments.
Yes, and that latter one, I can imagine in particular, is challenging because when HR is making decisions about that you need to fire N number of people, it's not because they're aware of the intricacies of your project and that you don't need those people anymore. It's not because they're aware of the deadlines. It might be, I was interviewing someone the other day who was working for a big company, or it was like quarterly, stock meeting with the stock analysts, and like they needed to show some costs were cut. So a bunch of people got fired, and sometimes that's all the reason there is for what you need to do.
Yeah. And firing people is always difficult, but I found it very challenging in these situations because people ask you why me and why, and you don't have an answer. If you fire someone, you had a longer interaction with the person about performance, about how to become better, and then it ends in, if the person, or for whatever reason, might be behavioral reason, or for whatever reason you need to fire someone, but there is a reason. It's not easy. For me, it's still difficult after all these years, but very, very difficult. But there's a reason. But when you lay off people for financial reasons and not for this particular person, it's very difficult to explain. And they ask you why, but there is no answer to that. Why them?
Yeah. And one of the other challenges, I understand from just not having really done it myself, but having interviewed so many authors about this kind of thing, is that you also have to learn how to talk to the management in terms of numbers and finances and things like that. And that's something that someone who comes from the technology side and gets promoted can often find, not necessarily all that challenging, but just unfamiliar and unexpected. Now you're in a meeting and you're like, we've got this great feature, and they're like, how will that change the bottom line? And you're like, I don't even know how to calculate that.
Yeah. Yeah. When I wanted to get into the top management board of that eBay subsidiary, because I have been demoted when eBay came in, essentially there were a lot of restructuring and people leaving and stuff. So, but I wanted to get back into the top management team, and one reason was I knew about business, but I wasn't good enough. So I needed to become really good on business terms, and before the company considered me getting back into top management. So this was something I was lacking, even if I was aware of business, very thoughtful about business, of trade-offs, and had very good relationships with business. Especially like when I left a company, usually people remember me because I could explain things to business in a way they understood it. Like we had a lot of technical challenges where I'm proud of that we solved them, the team solved them, but no one was interested in these. But everyone was interested in, but Stephan, yeah, you're great at explaining things. So business is valuing tech leaders on different things that compared to what they value themselves, on what they value themselves. And that's something that you need to understand as an engineering leader, I think.
And how did you solve that problem that you weren't sort of necessarily all that good at the business side of things, but at that moment when you explicitly were thinking like, I want to get into the top tier of management, did you go do an MBA? Did you do something else?
No, I didn't do an MBA. I thought about that, but I got a lot of support from eBay and from management. But I also talked to the CFO and to other people, which I think is also something that engineering managers don't do enough. Talking to other people, trying to learn from marketing and trying to learn from accounting. There is so much knowledge in a company that is available to you if you ask. But I think a lot of engineering leaders are not tapping into that potential.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was just talking to someone the other day about how how can you move from that first entry level job as a programmer? How do you get up to the level where you can actually sort of talk up in a meeting and object to something that someone a few levels above you can say? And he said, attend all the meetings you can, basically. Be around people as much as you can.
Yep.
Even if they're not, especially if they're not directly in what you're doing, and ask. And people, when they see that you're interested, they see that you're aiming somewhere else, and they're often very happy that you are.
Yeah, and it's also a great tip, I think, for getting promoted, because if you really want to get promoted, the boss of your boss needs to know you.
Right.
If the boss of your boss doesn't know you, then it's hard to get significant promotions. Your boss only can promote you so far, but it's not in any way really significant. So sticking around in meetings where the boss of your boss is around, and she knows you by name, that's a good promotion tip, I think.
And you, skipping ahead, you eventually sort of, I believe you had a big exit or something like that, and you decided to become a CTO coach?
Yeah, my wife had an exit for a startup, and so we both thought about what we're doing in the future, what we're going to do in the future. And she decided to write novels, and I decided to become a CTO coach.
And so you have this sort of really good newsletter on LinkedIn and things like that. And so now we can move on to talking about the book. And actually, perhaps we should talk about InkMe first. So I mentioned it in the introduction. There's a website where people can go to sign up. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that project?
That's my next startup. So that's what I'm working on. It's a small thing. It will not be a very large thing. It will be a very niche thing, but it's about dream jobs for CTOs. So it's a place where CTOs first can describe what their dream job would look like, and then second, for companies to find CTOs and give them their dream job. Because that's from my coaching practice, actually, that too many CTOs don't have a dream job. And I think they are great, but they are stuck in a job that they don't really love. And then it would be some things that need to change. And so I thought, well, why not create a platform that gives them the opportunity to get the dream job?
Oh, that's a really fantastic idea, and I hope it works both for you and for your clients, because I mean, that's the ultimate outcome for both sides of it, right? Is someone company hiring someone for whom it's their dream job. I mean, that's the best. Just before we go on to talk a little bit about your book, Amazing CTO, there's one question that comes up on this podcast relatively frequently, which is, if you were starting out now in a career in tech and software, would you get a university degree in computer science?
No.
Okay. Why is that?
I think it's too much of, like, it depends on what you want to do. But if you don't want to go in academia, I think it's too much of a time investment, because if you depending on how much time you spend, but several years, even if you go for a master, then it's longer. And the time that you spend, if you compare that going to a startup, like 5 years in a startup might give you more of a career and more of learning and more about management and all the stuff you really need to know than 4 or 5 years in academia, or 3 years or something if you have for a bachelor. So I think I would prefer practical knowledge, and I think it's good for your career. But that's only for where I have a great expertise, I think, in growing startups and fast-growing startups and that. So I don't have experience getting into Google or getting into Meta or something. So if you want to get into Google and Meta, that might still be necessary. Also, a lot of large companies also ditched the requirement to have a master degree or something to start working for them. But it might be different. I have no good understanding. But for a startup, if you want to work there, I don't think a university degree is needed.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that really good answer. The qualification of, like, there are some places that do require it still is something I do hear from people. I mean, particularly defense. Often those kinds of companies, like if that's your ambition, you look into it, because they'll have requirements. And there are companies like Google and stuff like that. But the other side of that coin is that you might not be able to get your foot in the door in those industries or those companies day one without a university degree. But if you go and succeed, in a startup or something like that, and then you've got all these accomplishments behind you, the lack of a university degree typically won't matter. That'll be some time along in your career, but it won't. As we know, 20 years later, people might be, oh, that's interesting. Where'd you go to college? But it's kind of, what have you been doing since that becomes more important those years down the line.
Yeah. And people hire you because you have special knowledge in something. You've done something that the company needs, like you have done AI, they need AI, or you've done some years ago mobile, they need mobile. You've done agile, you've done agile, they need agile. That's how I came into one company. So often there's something that you have and they want, and for that reason you get the job. And if you have experience in startups, working experience, I think it's easier to fill that need than compared to just coming from university. I think that it's difficult you can choose your project in university if you're very careful, but I think it's difficult from coming from university and filling a special need in a company. It's easier if you have some prior work knowledge where you worked on some Kafka, and you worked on Kafka. The company needs, not that you should work on Kafka, but you work on Kafka, and the company needs special Kafka knowledge, and that's what you bring to the table, and then you're hired.
Yeah, you remind me of a very specific story of a guest I had on recently who worked for the Ferrari F1 team in the software side. It's fascinating stuff. And I was like, well, for anyone watching, how do you get hired to the Ferrari F1 team? And he goes, being in the right place at the right time, and luck, because he was into extreme programming and agile at the time. And they were like, well, we need to learn how to go faster, safer, literally, and in the software side of things. And they heard about this extreme programming and agile stuff, and they were like, okay, and he could speak Italian, and so there he was on that team.
Yes.
And so okay, so now moving on to your book, Amazing CTO, which has been one of our recent bestsellers on Leanpub, which was really great to see it just pop up. What was the origin story of the book?
The origin story of the book is from my coaching background, from the clients I have and the challenges they have, and also looking back, what I think made me successful in my career. And I saw that people are excellent in technical skills, like they have deep knowledge about technologies and that stuff. But I've reflected on success, and I think, coming back to what I said before about business experience and talking to business, which made me kind of successful, I thought there is a need to tell people some things they need to do to be successful, and it's not the technical things. It's you need to be excellent in technologies, otherwise you will fail in the job. But it will not make you successful. Most people, there are some, obviously, if it's really critical to the business, then tech is very essential. But for a lot of companies, it's not that essential that you're a Kafka expert or something, but that you know a lot of other things about management and how to deal with people and how to deal with all the people, essentially. Software engineering is a people business.
Yes, which is something that obviously, even a lot of insiders kind of, underestimate the importance of that kind of thing. It's interesting, for example, that point you made about like, how do you get promoted if the person above your boss doesn't know who you are, for example, things like that. One interesting, we're not going to go into like super detail, but one interesting thing that you have in your book is rule number 1, which is, starts with a yes. And it is, I know I'm not an engineer myself, but I know that often it's like, when an idea is proposed, the first thing is all the problems that you want to bring up and that you see, as opposed to sort of, let's say yes to this and sort of like overcome them.
Yeah, that's mostly because I came to that one when eBay bought us, because American culture, very generalized, but American culture is different from German culture. There is a lot of no in German culture, engineering culture, where there's a lot more positive yes in American culture. So we had some clashes, or I had some clashes before I adapted enough to understand everything. And I think from engineering standpoint, it's when it fails, it's you. So you have to fix everything that fails. So engineers are very careful saying yes. They want to point out all the holes in the plot. So and this is something I hear from too many CEOs. I go to the CTO, he says, no, can't be done. It's too difficult, takes too much time. No. And that's not helpful. And so I think you need to start with a yes as an engineering. Be open and start with a yes. There is a time for a no. There's a rule also in the book to say no, but you need to decide about the point of time when to say no and start with the yes.
You're leading me to make a joke about how if Germans are sort of inclined to say no and Americans are inclined to say yes, then I guess us Canadians are like maybes or something like that. But it is. I mean, it is interesting. One of the features of this kind of work, and we were talking about, sort of you can't see it and stuff like that, is, the concept of invisible success, for example. Like, knock on wood, things don't burn around us. Fires don't happen basically anymore. But we don't think about what a wonderful success that was of fire departments and sort of, safety people who make couches and mattresses that don't start on fire anymore. It's just a fact of our lives. And often I think that this can be something that's going to be very depressing from the software engineering side of things, is if someone asks you for something and you deliver it, they're like, well, of course you did. I asked for it. If you don't, they yell at you because it's late. And if it breaks, they yell at you because it's broken. But you rarely a year down the line are they like, wow, you guys did such a great job.
Yes. That's what the CEO once told me. He said, I don't want to have your job, Stephan. If everything works and no one recognizes the effort, and if it fails, everyone is angry. So
Yes. Yeah. I know. I also like one thing I should mention about your book that's really great is the idea of songs that you use to structure it. So there's part 2 is called Relax. The next part is Land of Confusion. And then there's Running Up That Hill, Hunting High and Low. Get an aha reference in there, which is really good. There's some Dire Straits. I mean, it's just a very good idea for making the book entertaining. Was that an idea that you had when you went into the book, or was it something that came to you as you were writing it?
It came to me when I was writing it. Essentially, even it was feedback from some early reviewers, because I had this. It was even more, like 150 rules or something.
Oh,
and it's just, and it was kind of unstructured, and I struggled a little bit with how to structure it, and I had different approaches how to structure it. And I tried to not structure it, but the general feedback was it's too much. So there needs to be some kind of structure, and I played around with structures, with levels, and with different things. Also at one point with airplanes, because I'm very interested in planes. And but I ended up with the songs because it's emotional. I think technical engineers, leaders are not emotional, don't value emotions enough. They are too fact-based. So that's one reason. And I'm from the 80s, so these are 80s songs. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And just one, just to give a little bit more flavor of what's happening in the book. Rule 140 is have a personal brand. This is the last one in the book, and I really like that because I think I first learned about the idea of a personal brand not from like online, kind of promoting and stuff like that, but from the world of diplomacy. So one thinks about like Henry Kissinger's glasses, or like often diplomats will actually, they'll wear a bow tie, or they'll have a cane, or a neckerchief they'll wear a sort of thing in their breast pocket or something like that.
Yeah.
That they all wore colored glasses or something like that. And often it can seem kind of weird or silly from the outside, but if you imagine people who are meeting people all the time, and sometimes it might be a couple of years between meetings, things like a personal brand, like even a visual one like that, can make a difference. And people will remember you, and it's a lot of it's about that. It's like, I think what you're saying in the book here is like, that's the execution person, or that's the problem solving person, or something like that. And having something like that people know you up for can really help in leadership.
Yeah. And you always will have some kind of brand. The question is only, is it the brand you want? So you need to actively manage this. Like, I'm seen as a problem solver. Perhaps I don't want to be seen as a problem solver, or I'm seen as an executing guy, but I don't want to be seen as that. I want to be seen as an innovator or something, so what do you need to do to be perceived as an innovator? So in this way, engineering leaders are often too reactive and not active enough on how they want to be seen and what they want. And it ties also into again, back to InkMe, what's your dream job? Where do you get joy from? What do you really want to do? Versus what are you reactively doing? And then what's your reactively, how are you branded reactively? Versus how would your brand look like if you could manage it, and if you will manage it? So that's also where it comes from.
Yeah, that's really great. I feel so naive. I'd never thought of that before, that whether you've come up with one and whether you're cultivating one or not, you will have a brand or a reputation for something. And if you're not actively thinking about cultivating it, then it'll just be thrust upon you. You might get lucky. It might be exactly the one that you want. But if it's not, you do have to think about that and be aware of it. Just moving on to the last part of the interview. So you've written this great book. What was your process for that? Did you like sort of block off time, like 2 hours after you get up every morning, or just weekends? Did you have a room you went into where it's like, no one bug me? What was your process for writing?
So I was writing something every day for some time, and then I stopped because I was reflecting too much on the book, and I thought, is it good enough? Is this something people really want to read? Is this something people might not want to read? And so I got into I got blocked a little bit. And then essentially my wife unblocked me, and she read the book at that point and said, I think it's so great, you need to finish it. And so then I essentially put a lot of effort in it, and it's not so whole days writing, several days, quite a lot of days then writing the whole day in between coaching sessions to finish the book.
Yeah, it's that's a very good story. I mean, like when people hear writer's block, they think, oh, I just can't put words down on the page, but it can often be loss of momentum or loss of confidence in yourself or your project or something like that. There's all kinds of things that can block a writing project from going forward. And obviously having people around to encourage you is one of the most important things, and not discouraging you, to put it negatively as well, is also very important, because they can be long-term. You're taking time away from other things and people and things like that. And there's all kinds of things that can get in the way. The last question I always like to ask on the podcast, if the guest has written a book on Leanpub, is if while you were using Leanpub, there was one thing that had you shaking your fist at the screen going, damn you, Leanpub, sucks, that we could fix for you, or if there was one magical feature that we could build for you, is there anything you can think of that you would ask us to do?
So I had some challenges, but I got great support. I think we have had some mails exchange. So I was very, very happy about that. If I could change one thing, I think the compilation process should get faster. That was something, especially in the end. It's nothing in the beginning, but in the end, especially when I have a large appendix. There are a lot of pictures in the appendix. Then there are pictures in these song interludes. So I think the document got larger and larger. So the compilation time got larger and larger, and then that sometime was not most of the time, but sometimes it was annoying. So if I could wish for something for instant compilation, that would be it.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. Actually, the second last time I asked this question, I got a very similar answer, which is like, can I just have, if I'm writing my manuscript on the left, can I just see what it's going to look like on the right? And as a version of that, for anyone listening who hasn't used Leanpub, you write a manuscript, you click a button to create the ebook files, basically, and like it'll be a PDF, EPUB, and then a web format. We call it a preview if it's just for you, and a publish if it's making it public. And so when you hit those buttons, there's a little progress bar at the top of the screen, and you'll see it go through various steps. And as your book gets bigger, and especially if there's big images and stuff like that, those steps can take longer and longer to carry out. And sometimes it can be very, it can be rather frustrating to have to wait, because there's a progress bar. There's no like 3 minutes left or anything like that. It's just kind of arbitrary. That's actually something we could probably do, like some estimate or something like that. Like because for a short book that's just text, it takes hardly any time at all.
Nope.
We do have a way of doing subsets that people use. So for example, the way a Leanpub book is generated is from a list of files. And if you're using GitHub or Dropbox, you can actually just you can have all the files, but then you can actually, there's a file called book.txt where you can just generate one file, for example. So that can shorten it. But if you're if you're like generating the whole book, that can take a long time. And maybe some kind of estimate at least, or something like that would help mitigate the frustration there as well.
I only have one book text in my...
Oh, you do? Okay.
Because also a journey. I started with Scrivener and to write the book, because I thought what I really wanted to have is, especially with the rules and things, to move, so I could move things around easily. So that was the reason to use Scrivener. But then there was so much stuff in Scrivener and the customization to get the Leanpub output format. So I dropped that and I wrote my own tool in Go. And I wrote the book in my programming IDE, essentially. And it's 200 files, 200 Markdown files with some a little bit front matter in each file, and then a small tool that creates all the chapters and everything into this book.txt, and then that's committed to GitHub. So, and I'm very happy with the way now with my own tool. It works fine, and
that's really fascinating. It's one of the great things about having so many authors who are themselves, or at least perhaps at some point in their career, maybe they're not coders anymore, but they were. And so many Leanpub authors are coders, and it's so interesting to hear about these stories about how they come up with their, like, there's all these professional tools out there like Scrivener that people love and Ulysses and things like that. But then they're like, you know what, I can do better. And, and they just go ahead and do better. And it's always so great to hear that. Well, thank you very much for taking some time out of your evening to talk to me and to talk to our audience today about your background and your career and your book, Amazing CTO.
Thank you.